It's actually been a little while. I've been in San Francisco quite a few days in a row. I miss you all. And I'm excited to be back down here for today to talk to you about how startups work. It's been one of the most popular topics requested by students, and so we put together a presentation to cover information on the startup world and how it operates and why things are the way they are and sometimes not the way they seem. So I'm going to go over a whirlwind of different common questions, and then I want to, of course, budget some time for you to ask me questions at the end. So those of you who are startup-minded or interested, of course, I know you'll be listening. But those of you who are not necessarily, I still want you to pay attention, because being in the Make School community and being right where you are right now in Silicon Valley means that a certain level of awareness and understanding of how this all works is important. And so I'd be disappointed to find out, after this lecture, if you didn't know the things that I'm covering right now. So let's first preface this by saying that there's no rules, meaning the startups that succeed are typically the exception, right? So few of them actually make it, so many of them fail, that every startup that succeeds has some aspect to it or feature to it that kind of defies the conventional wisdom. And so for everything I tell you for the rest of the presentation that is in general true about startups, you can of course find really successful examples that are counterexamples. So keep that in mind. Your job as a founder is to take advice like this and advice given by others, and then based on all the information presented to you, make the right decision. And sometimes the right decision doesn't sound like the conventional decision. And it's often the good founders who are the ones most able to realize that, the ones who are most able to say, you know what, everyone says it should be done this way, but I've decided that this is not the way I want to go. Option B is my plan, and that ends up leading them to success. So let's start with ideas. It's often said, but I'll say it again, ideas are worthless. They tend to fall into two categories. Either everyone thinks that they are an amazing idea. That's like maybe Uber, and then everyone is trying to compete on who can do it better and faster with the biggest budget, and you have these companies raising money to compete against each other, and no argument that the world wants something like Uber or Lyft or Sidecar or Summon or any number of their competitors and imitators. The other category of idea is one where no one thinks that it's a good idea, and that might be something like Airbnb. The original Airbnb was, we are going to rent out air mattresses in our spare bedroom and then make a service for other people to rent out air mattresses on their spare bedroom. Everyone told them that that was not a great business. And so they persevered and did it, and now are a multi-billion-dollar company. So what does an idea tell you? It doesn't tell you much. If everyone loves it, great. Maybe everyone's trying to do it too. Maybe it's going to be hard to succeed. Maybe the market is crowded. Maybe it's the kind of idea that if there's nothing out there that is actually an implementation of the idea, there may be some hidden barriers. Very commonly, student developers will come up with the same ideas over and over again and pitch them to me at hackathon after hackathon after hackathon, yet these don't actually come to reality because there's some barriers they don't consider. Or people tell you that you're stupid, your idea is dumb, and 95% of the time, they're right. So if people are telling you that your idea is dumb and they don't believe in you, it's not usually a sign that you're on the right track. But it turns out that since there are no rules and most successes are exceptions, that a huge number of really successful companies started off with ideas that everyone told the founders were dumb. So, how could you pitch Twitter in a world where Twitter doesn't exist and not sound dumb? It's really hard. So, what does this tell you? Ideas are worthless. What you really, really need to understand is who's going to use it, why you're going to make them happy. And if you get that, and you can articulate that, and you can prove that people are going to use it, and they're going to be happy, that's what matters the most. When people tell you about the idea, it's great, it sucks, less important. And that leads into the next point, which is you're going to release or ship it as soon as you can make the people turn off my Wi-Fi. Please hold. Anyway, that slide was on the MVP. I was saying you're going to ship your MVP at the moment that you're able to create some amount of utility, meaning being meaningfully useful to the group of people that you hypothesize are going to get value from your service. And many times this is doable pre-tech. You don't actually need how are we doing? You don't actually need to build anything. You don't need to build software to prove this. A lot of people in your boat will think, well, I can make apps, so my next idea has to be an app, so my MVP has to be an app. Oftentimes, your MVP in the real world is pre-app. Could you build Airbnb without a website, without an app? Of course you could. At the very beginning, to validate the idea is a good one, you should probably manually reach out to like 10 people, find 3 who'd be willing to rent out an air mattress in their bedroom, and then manually reach out to 100 more people over email to find 5 who want to rent the 3 bedrooms that you've lined up, to even prove that there's people in the world who want the thing that you would build, and then go ahead and actually build it. A lot of people in your generation get caught up in the, well, I can't launch it yet because the app doesn't exist or the website doesn't exist, when they haven't even validated that there's people out there who actually want the thing that they are planning on making. So the MVP can either be the technological incarnation of what you want to build at its simplest form that provides value to people, or it can be pre-technological, meaning you use the phone and the emails and these old technologies to prove out that there's demand for what you're building even before you write a single line of code. Next we have how you turn a product into a startup, which is, okay, I have my MVP, I launched it, now what? What does it mean? You know, when does my side project become a startup? What is a startup, right? First of all, you should know that this is kind of a semantic point. So it's rooted in what the definition is right now in the Silicon Valley. Does this mean that this is the definition that everyone has ever had for a startup? No. To give you a sense of a term that is always in flux as to what it really means, think of the term hacker. What is a hacker? What is a hacker if you ask someone in rural Tennessee? What is a hacker if you ask someone in New York City? What is a hacker if you ask someone at a hackathon? You're going to get all different answers. So I'm giving you the answer, the Silicon Valley answer as to what a startup is. First of all, it's usually something you're working on full time. I've never seen a startup make meaningful progress past the MVP stage when the founders were not working on it full time. It just doesn't tend to happen. A startup is also something that you're doing because there is no other way to achieve your goals. And we'll hit upon that later. But at the core of turning your product into a startup is having users and happy users. Better you have 100 happy users than 1,000 people who kind of only sort of care about what you're created. The reason that a product would ever turn into a startup is that you can't help yourself. You have so many people using it, and that you have this sense that if you kept on working on it, you could get more people to use it, and the people who are using it today really like it, and if you continued working on it, you could get more and make them happy, and this could grow, and gee, I really feel bad abandoning this opportunity, right? And so I want to work on it full time, make this my startup. But you know, I've met people at hackathons who tell me that they are running 12 startups, and what they mean is, I've launched 12 apps. That's not, the Silicon Valley definition is not, an app does not equal a startup, a product does not equal a startup. There's a big difference between a side project and a startup. And the advice I'm going to give you is heavily oriented towards startups. So a lot of the things I say not to do might be really good ideas if you're just working on a side project, right? Side projects typically are for fun or for learning or for a small amount of income. They're not to like dominate the world, whereas startups, the other part of the definition in Silicon Valley, are vehicles with high growth. You want to be a startup if you want to grow really, really fast. And so if you're not trying to grow really fast, you're actually not creating what Silicon Valley folk would consider to be a startup. When you start your startup, the biggest challenge is going to be finding people, finding a team of folks. Over the course of 10 years, people will come and go, right? Possibly except for the founders. But your ability to attract good people is one of the most impactful forces on your success. Because each individual person, especially in the early days, can have a tremendously large impact on how you do. And so if you tell me that you met your co-founder at a hackathon last week, you've spoken once for an hour, you got along real well, and now you started the company together, well, that sounds to me like someone saying, I met this person in Vegas last week, at a club and now we're married, right? That's the equivalent. People are very important. Your co-founder is someone that you're going to be basically married to, you have to know really well. And teams that only recently have gotten to know each other, typically not a good fit. Someone that you've worked with in the past or been friends with for a long time. Someone you met at the summer academy could definitely qualify, but you've been around each other for weeks, extended period of time. It's not like an hour at a hackathon. And then when you start hiring people, getting good, smart people is unbelievably important. There's a saying, hire slow, fire fast. Be very deliberate and conservative about who you choose to hire, but as soon as you have a doubt as to someone being a good fit for your company, don't hesitate to fire them. I have never met a founder who felt like they fired people too early. Only founders, dozens, hundreds at conferences, almost like Alcoholics Anonymous. There was a YC conference where we talked about it, and everyone was just lamenting about how conflicted they felt about the fact that they fired too slowly. Yet every single time they fired someone, they wished they'd done it earlier. And that every moment that they chose to fire someone was a moment too late. Because every moment that someone is in the organization who does not belong there is a moment that the morale of others is impacted and your productivity and the amount you spend is impacted. So hire slow, firing fast is very important, and attracting smart people is very important. There's another saying, A people hire A people, B people hire C people. The top of the top, the best of the best, attract the best of the best. They're not intimidated by people who are better than them, and they are at the top of their game, very confident, very good at what they do. People who are a rung below that, they seem good, quite good, they're good enough, they could fit, they're my friend, let's have them join the team. B people end up attracting, they don't attract A people because A people want to work with A people. They might get intimidated by people who are the same level as them, and so that when you empower them to hire more people, they end up hiring C people. It's a harsh saying, but it's a common one. And people breakdown is the number one reason for startups not working out. You think startups stop because they run out of money, but most often they stop with money in the bank, with a future ahead of them, because the founders get into an argument, because the team quits, something like that. So your ability to attract and retain smart people is one of the most important things you can do. There's many companies that have had smart, really good people that have failed, but I don't know of any companies that have had untalented people succeed. So when is the right point to start attracting people? When is the right point to start turning your product into a startup? Product market fit is a term used to describe the moment where you actually know that people truly do want to use what you've created. This moment is not obvious. This moment is not when you have 100 people using it. This moment comes quite a bit later. It's when with full confidence you can say, if I had more resources today and now to bring my product to more people would definitely use it. And this is the moment when you notice the challenge shifting from building the best product to getting it out there to the most people. And your organization changes. All of a sudden, you were a team of 4, maybe all engineers, programmers like you, building the best product possible, have a designer on board, you get it out there, people love it, and all of a sudden, you need to grow this thing. You need more customers to be able to have enough revenue to pay your bills, or you need to get the word out there because you know people want it, but nobody's heard of it. And all of a sudden, you realize, you know what, I've hit product market fit. My product is useful and appreciated in the market. I now have to hire new people whose only job it is to help me distribute this to a larger audience. And that is an interesting shift. There's some people who are really good at pre-product market fit stage companies because their talent lies in building great products and understanding users really well, but then they have a harder time once it shifts to how to get it out there as good as possible. And that's how that shift of being the best at the early versus being best post-product market fit is how you see sometimes the worst product succeeding in the market, right? So you have the team that made like VHS, you have the team that made Betamax. This is the old formats, pre-DVD for cassette video. One was higher resolution than the other, but they still lost because the best team that made the best video cassette was not the team that was the best at getting it out there in the market. And this is why, some people, especially when you're dealing with a product that has network effects, where users make it useful for other users, the fact that you're better at getting it out there ends up meaning that you get a better product. Because at the end of the day, imagine a social network like Facebook versus a social network like Google+. It doesn't matter how theoretically Google+ could be maybe a better interface. I don't think it is, but let's say it was. Since the utility of the service is the people using it, and since Facebook has all the people, then you end up winning by default in that circumstance. Also think of like a Lyft or Uber situation, right? If you wanted to launch something and you could prove to me, I have an app people want, everyone loves ride sharing, people use Uber and Lyft all the time, so check product market fit. Mine is better, my UI and design is better, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful. Well, you would still not succeed because you don't have the right drivers that they do, right? People would request in your app and then people wouldn't show up. So being able to get the product out there to a lot of people is actually important, oftentimes not just to succeed for the product itself, but because the people using it will make it better for other people using it. And if you're not the best one at that, then you can't win even if your product is technically better. And engineers get caught up all the time in these ideological issues around like, but how could that one succeed when this one is better? Happens all the time. How can X social network succeed when that one is better? How can this video sharing site succeed when that one is better, right? Have you ever heard of app.net? It's a better Twitter. Summer Academy students, why don't you use the better Twitter? People who made app.net were not very good at getting app.net out there, but Twitter was good at getting Twitter out there. So always an interesting kind of phenomenon. Think of Yo. And people use Yo for real. But when Yo came out, people made better Yos pretty immediately, right? They were like, oh my gosh, that app sucks, I can make one better. There were tons of better Yos out there. But once you got past the product market fit stage, it was all about who could get it in the hands of most people the fastest, get the most word of mouth, and so on and so forth. Why is shifting from building the best product to getting the most people using it important? It's because growth is a key determining characteristic of startups. And this is related to the funding model of startups, which I'll explain to you in a second. But to give you some benchmarks on growth and venture capital, no, where's that? Okay, I guess it's in the notes. So to give you a benchmark around growth, if you're growing 10 times a year, that's great. If you're growing 5 times a year, that's really good. If you're doubling every year, you are not venture capital fundable. So if you're building a business, no matter how great, that is not more than doubling every year, you are probably not fundable by Silicon Valley venture capitalists. So if you want to play the Silicon Valley game and build a company Silicon Valley style, growth is the most important factor. And because growth is the most important factor, it's actually a very big deal to try and go after product market fit to get the most people using the app or the service, because if you don't grow, then you fail. And even doubling every year, which sounds amazing, is enough to get you kicked out of the Silicon Valley leagues and not get your next round of funding and go out of business. So why is that? Like why, who in the world would say that a business that is doubling every year is not venture capital fundable? How do VCs make money? So, I get $100 from a VC, and the VC says, Jeremy, use this $100 to set up your lemonade stand. I put in the $100 into materials, I buy some lemons, I start selling lemonade, I become profitable. I throw in $100 and I've created this business that generates $100 of revenue a month. Reliable. Awesome. Amazing. I took $100, I turned it into $100 a month. Is that a startup? Am I venture fundable? No. Venture capitalists in the Silicon Valley do not make money based on how much money you make. It sounds crazy. How do they make money? Venture capitalist comes to me and says, Jeremy, here's $100 to create your lemonade stand. But what I'm going to do is instead of giving you a loan and saying, hey, pay me back the $100 plus $10, pay me back 110. That's what a bank does. Venture capitalist says, we're going to create a company, Lemonade Stands Incorporated, and I'm going to buy 10% of that company. So I've given you $100. I now have 10% of Lemonade Stands Incorporated. If $100 buy me 10%, what is the company worth? Louder? $1,000. So this venture capitalist is saying, Jeremy, I have faith in you. You seem like quite the lemonade stand kind of guy. I think even today, with your team and your experience, Lemonade Stand Incorporated is worth $1,000. It's a $1,000 business, right? And so I'm going to buy 10% of it for $100. And now that I have my 10%, I'm happy. Now that you have the $100, go build a business. How will my venture capitalist make money? My venture capitalist will make money when he or she can take the 10% that they own and sell it back to someone else. Who are the people who can buy 10% in Lemonade Stand Incorporated? Two kinds of people. One, another company. So, Lemonade Megacorp can come along and say, hey, I want to buy all of Lemonade Stands Incorporated. I own 90%, so I get 90% of the money. The venture capitalist owns 10%, they get 10% of the money, and we're happy. Whenever you hear of, Facebook bought Instagram, right? Like, so-and-so, Yahoo offered to buy Snapchat. These are all deals that go like this, that they're going to try to buy 100% of all the shares, and those shares are split between the founders, between some of the early employees, and between the investors who bought a percentage. And they're all going to sell all those shares to a company. My girlfriend works at Oculus right now, the virtual reality company, and they sold to Facebook for $2 billion. So if you owned, 50% of Oculus, you made $1 billion. And if you're the founder of Oculus, you probably own more like 10, 20%, you still made hundreds of millions of dollars, right? If you were the early investor in Oculus who bought 10% of the company in the early days, you also made hundreds of millions of dollars. So back to lemonade stands, if I build a business where with $100, I'm now generating $100 in revenue a month, what is my future growth potential? Doesn't seem great. Geez, Jeremy's kind of checked out. He's like checking in on his lemonade stand like once a week. It's like plateaued. It's $100 a month. It's not growing. Who wants to buy that, right? What's it worth? Well, maybe it's worth $2,000 now that it's proven. We went from it being worth $1,000 to $2,000. So Megacorp comes along, wants to buy me for $2,000. My venture capitalist doubles his money, right? Bought 10% for 100, got 200 back. Sounds great. For that venture capitalist, when they go back to their partners, they're going to report it as a big failure. Because they make so many investments in companies where they lose all their money that they only really care about the companies that end up returning to them a massive, massive amount. If I invest in 10 lemonade stands, 7 of them fail, 2 of them double in size, and 1 of them sells for $1 billion, then the fact that the 2 that doubled ends up somewhere at the end, like after the decimal point on my accounting sheet. Like my economic success is almost the same as if I cut out all the companies that were not a 100x, 1000x return on my investment. So since I only make money as a venture capitalist when my investments return to me 100x, 1000x, I am investing in founders with the idea that they're going to try and grow their business to be as big as possible. And it turns out that the value of your business factors in how much money you're making today, but even more so in the value factors in your future growth potential, to the degree that it's considered acceptable to run businesses not profitably, meaning you're losing money, so that you can grow them faster, because if you grow them faster, you'll be able to make more money later. And the value of your company is calculated based on how much investors think you'll be able to make money later, even if you're losing tons of money today. So an investor in my lemonade stand, who's a typical venture capitalist, would rather I take crazy risk to build an international franchise of lemonade stands that's going to sell for $1 billion than play it safe and guarantee him that I'm going to double my lemonade stand business. Does that make sense? So when you hear startups that seem to have a really good thing going on, they have a product people like, seem successful, they have some funding, and then they shut down, or then they sell, the product gets canceled, or then they raise more funding and then try to do all these crazy things to finally start making money. And you're like, why would you ever do that? Their business was already successful. They already had the product. They were making tons of money. The reason that a company would do that is that they took investment with the implicit or sometimes explicit promise that they would try to grow it big or go broke. And so the culture in the Valley, if you're doing a startup specifically, is that you are going to try to go big or you're trying to go broke. So our investors want us to run Make School without turning a profit, because if we do it that way, we can grow faster. And if we can grow faster, then we can compete with universities and other people. And then once we are bigger and able to compete and stronger, then it's okay to turn the dial and start becoming profitable. This is the typical investor opinion. Now, I told you there are no rules. We're probably going to do things a little bit differently here, but that's the general idea. If you look at a Snapchat, if you look at a Facebook, if you look at a Twitter, or any typical venture capital deal, that is the model. So to summarize that very concisely, venture capitalists make money on the difference between the value of the company when they invested and the value of the company where they can sell their shares in the company. And since that's where they make their money, it has everything to do with how big the company is growing. The amount that they're interested in investing is directly correlated to your growth rate. And that's why a 10x growth rate year on year is venture capital fundable, whereas a 2x growth rate is not. So that's kind of the interesting economics behind that world. What this also means is if you're telling someone in Silicon Valley that you're running a startup, what you're communicating to them is, I'm running a company I'm working on full time, where my goal is to receive venture capital investment, or I already have, and my goal is to build it as big as I can, right? Now, investors don't want you to go big to infinity, but they want you to go big to somewhere where they can exchange whatever they bought for 100 times more or 1,000 times more, right? So it's okay for companies to eventually stabilize, like Google's and Facebook's, where they end up plateauing at a certain value, but they plateaued really, really high. If you look at Facebook's example specifically, Facebook had 101 opportunities to do safe things. When it was first growing early on, Mark Zuckerberg could have sold it for $500 million, right? Why not do that? Didn't do it. Saw the growth trajectory, knew the potential was greater. Mark Zuckerberg later could have sold it for $1 billion, didn't do it. Saw the growth trajectory, saw the potential. Could have monetized it earlier. Could have put ads there earlier. Why not even charge a subscription fee? When they had 50 million users, why not just charge every user $1 a month and then like go retire to Hawaii? Why would you try to continue growing it, right? Well, they took Silicon Valley investment, they had a Silicon Valley mentality, and now, many years later, Facebook is worth in the order, I think, of $20 billion or more, and Facebook is pulling in real profits. So they got there eventually once they were big, but they sacrificed a lot of safe opportunities for a guaranteed payoff because their investors wanted them to shoot for the moon and only stabilize once the investors had made back a huge multiple of their money invested. Most of the comments you'll see online on Silicon Valley deals, Silicon Valley behavior, or startup behavior in general comes from people who don't understand this model and therefore just can't fathom why companies would behave in the way that they're behaving. How can it be possible that a company is worth $20 billion but they're losing $100 million a year? That doesn't make sense. But in Silicon Valley math, you go, oh, they're being valued at $20 billion because the investors behind the scenes have seen a plan that if they continue losing $100 million a year, they'll eventually get to a place where they can make $1 billion a year, and it's worth it for them to be the winner and for us to sell 100 times more than we first invested at. So the second way for someone to turn shares into money, I covered the first way, another company buys you. Second way is what's called an IPO. Also referred to as going public. Who in the room has heard of companies going IPO? All right. So there's a variety of stock exchanges, the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, there's a Hong Kong Stock Exchange. Every country has their own stock exchange or multiple stock exchanges. What a stock exchange is a place for someone who owns a percent of a company to offer to sell that percent to members of the public, i.e. you. If you wanted to buy a percent of Airbnb today, you could not. Airbnb is a private company. They will only sell a percent of their company to investors that they know, or they will give small chunks to their employees as bonuses, but they will not sell it to you. You are not allowed to buy a percentage stake in Airbnb. In fact, when companies are not public, when they haven't gone IPO, they're often not even legally allowed to sell shares to you because you are considered to be unsophisticated investors who are not what are called accredited investors, meaning that you don't have enough understanding of how finance works and startups work to be allowed to invest in Airbnb. So even if you were sure that you wanted to, you probably can't legally. When a company goes public, they say, you know what, we want to be able to raise more funding. So the company wants to be able to get more money to spend on growing. Our investors want to be able to cash out, or our founders too. We want to turn the percentage of the company we bought into like real dollars instead of theoretical dollars. And to do that, we're going to go through the trouble of putting a lot of information on our company out there publicly available. So nobody knows what's going on with the finances internally at Airbnb because it's a private company. But public companies have to disclose every quarter what's going on financially and have to broadcast this information to the world. In exchange for making that public, they're allowed to sell shares in their company to you. So if you wanted to buy shares from Twitter or Facebook or Google, you could. And that's a big difference between public and private companies. It's also a different path. The way you make money could be to sell to a company, or it could be to hold on to all your shares until the day you go IPO, and then you sell your shares to a bunch of people in the public, basically all at once, and make your money that way. It doesn't change the core math, which is the investors only make money on the difference between the value when they invested and the value when they exited. And that is the term that everyone uses. What was your exit? And the exit types are sale to another company or IPO. So startups are implicitly going for an exit. And venture capitalists will always ask, what are the exit prospects? How is Make School going to exit? Right? Are we going to go public? Are we going to sell to another company? They ask us that all the time. How are we going to do it? I don't know. So why would you start a startup? Like, why would you start a startup? Does anyone have any ideas on why you would start a startup? Solve a need. Your idea is so good that you can't, you need to like devote yourself to it. So my philosophy is you should start a startup if it is like the only way. The only way. 95% of startups fail. And that's because there's tons in that 95% number that could have been good, stable, double, original size, nice lemonade stands, but instead tried to go big and failed. Every time you hear of a company completely failing, there's often a story where they crossed a point of no return, where if they had chosen to stay there, they could have stayed alive and sustained themselves. And they chose not to because they chose to be a startup, they chose to try to grow fast, and because they weren't able to, they shut down. Anyone heard of Secret? The mobile app Secret. Secret would have been a great app if one of you made it. You would have been thrilled to have millions of users. But when Secret raised huge amounts of venture capital, thereby tying themselves to a promise they'd be able to grow the service into a large business and eventually become the next Snapchat or the next Facebook, or the next Instagram, they shut down when they realized they were not going to be able to fulfill that goal. Even though there were tons of people still using Secret, still loving it, and it could have been successful as an app run by a nice 4-person team. But they intentionally passed that point of no return to try to go big, failed, and shut down. So think about that. If you have an idea that you really want to see exist, ask yourself, does it need to be a startup? Do you need to try to shoot for high growth? What if you ran it as a small business? What if you tried to safely double it every year? What would that look like? Would you still be able to reach as many people as you want? Would you still be able to have the impact you want? Would you be able to sustain the lifestyle that you want? People talk about starting a startup. Oftentimes, behind the back of their minds, I want to become rich like Mark Zuckerberg. I want to make my first $1 billion. I want prestige. I want fame. I want glory. I want money. Startups are like the least reliable way to get any of those things. On average, if you get a nice, safe job at a big tech company and pull in $120K a year with standardized raises over the course of 10 years, you will make more money than most startup founders. You want to get rich? Go work for a big tech company, right? In fact, salaries are so high nowadays, you can even go work for a small tech company and still get rich. Cost of living around here is very expensive, but that being said, it's expensive for startup founders too. And net, you're not going to get rich doing a startup as a reliable path. You want fame and glory? Well, it's going to be the glory of when your startup shutting down is all over the news. You want attention? Like, you'll get tons of attention, and a lot of it will be, a lot of it will be stressful. Elon Musk said starting a startup is like eating glass and staring into the abyss. Every startup founder you find, when you ask them behind the scenes, how's it going? They're like, this sucks. I don't know of any founders who are like, woo, like life is awesome because I'm doing a startup and so much better than my friends who have normal jobs. They'll tell you on the surface, like, yeah, I'm my own boss, it's amazing. And then when their friends are like, hey, Jeremy, we're camping this weekend, can you? No. Hey, Jeremy, we want to hang out tonight, can you? No. Hey, Jeremy, we have this disposable income. Oh, I don't. Hey, so, it's really difficult to stay in it if you're in it for any of the reasons I mentioned. Because it's so hard and it's so prone to failure that the first roadblock you hit, you have like your first argument with your co-founder, or like your first core team member quits, or like any number of things that like literally every successful startup has had to deal with, right? You get sued, or someone quits, or someone leaves, or someone dies, or your customers write an angry blog post about how terrible you are. Someone dies. A friend of mine started a company. Employee number 1 died. Employee number 2 was imprisoned. Still running. But if he wasn't in it because he truly believed that doing his startup was the only way to bring his vision to reality, when your first employee dies, you're like, all right, I'm out, right? That's like the normally like, and screw this. When your second employee gets incarcerated, you have to start from scratch again. You're like, okay, this is just not for me, right? But he truly believed in it, and that's why he continued. So it's very difficult to sustain yourself emotionally if you don't actually think that this is an important thing. I actually think that the future of America is at stake with the way that our higher education system is evolving. I actually think that our country will lose its competitive edge by putting a generation into debt and not teaching them skills that get them jobs. I actually think that the best way for me to have impact on the world is to grow this as big as I can while maintaining high quality. Your feedback is always appreciated. But, I really think that is important. And so I'm working towards that very, very strongly. But so many things have gone wrong, as they do for everyone. No one has a smooth startup story. So many things have gone wrong that I would not still be in it if I didn't actually like really care deeply. And so you have to have that reality check with yourself. Can you see yourself doing this for the next 10 years? 10 years is a long time. If it doesn't work, you'll be out in 2. If it does work, you're stuck in it for 5 to 10. Can you succeed? Is that even possible that you'll be there for 5 to 10 years? Or are you too impatient? Are you going to go for another idea? In the early days, you think, oh, this is a cool product, a cool service, but 5 years from now, it's going to be your identity. Like, I'm kind of the make school guy, right? So is that who you want to be? Is the identity tied to your startup? Is a big question to ask yourself. So the advice I'm giving is don't start a startup. If you want a real world example of why you should not start a startup, instead of having to take my word for it, don't take my word for it. Very simple. Get a job at a startup that has less than 5 people at it. Pure and simple. Get a job that is at a startup that has less than 5 people. You won't be able to tell whether you're headed 100 miles per hour towards a brick wall or whether you're going to be at the next Facebook. But it will feel like a mess. Every sub 5-person startup I've ever had the chance to spectate, to eavesdrop, to hang out, is a mess. And so if you can't handle that, then it's definitely not the right call. Don't start a startup. Work somewhere first, see what it's like. Don't start a startup. Start a small business. Run that sustainably. Learn how to be responsible, how to grow something, how to build something people want, and then see if it's cut out for you, right? It really has to be that startups are the way to achieve your vision, and if you work backwards from that criteria, you find that there's almost no one who is successful who doesn't meet that criteria. Like, as odd as it may seem, Mark Zuckerberg really has a deep conviction that technology can change the world, the way the world connects. And it seems, people disagree with him on like whether, being behind a computer screen is like the optimal way to connect with your social groups. But at the end of the day, if he was in it for the money, he would have sold it 500 million. He would have sold it $1 billion. You could retire for life. He had, if I tossed $300 million at you, would you say no? I mean, who in this room would say no, right? I wouldn't say no. I'd be like, all right, sweet. That was like, I'm done. But he not only was so in it that he persisted past the barriers and all the terrible things happening, his co-founders suing him and all that stuff, he then even persisted past potential points of success, which most of us would not have been able to do. So you really, really, really need to ask yourselves whether being a founder is the right thing for you. And if being a founder is the right thing, why not be a founder first of something that is not a typical startup? Do the training wheels version, build a great sustainable business, give that a shot for a couple of years, and then see whether management leadership is what you're cut out for. Mark Andreessen, who's a startup founder himself, and then a top venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, actually one of our investors, he says, you only ever experience two emotions, euphoria and terror, and I find the lack of sleep enhances them both. Startup founders, even when they start mentally stable, tend not to end that way. So it's really important that you are aware of this, because the glamour is actually much more there if you have a good job than if you have a startup, is the truth. So start a lifestyle business. A lifestyle business is the term that venture capitalists use when they try to insinuate that your business is not something they can fund. They're like, oh, it doesn't seem like you want to grow this fast enough. Is this a lifestyle business? We don't fund lifestyle businesses. But guess what? Lifestyle businesses are great. Why? Because they're designed to sustain a lifestyle. Who here wants a great lifestyle? Yeah. So if you look at the hierarchy and like the menu options of careers, you could, on one extreme, be the founder of a company, have a really terrible time, and possibly, despite your terrible time, make a lot of money, but probably fail. You could be the early employee at a small company where hopefully you're taking a little bit less risk than the founders because you've joined after they've gotten some funding. If you have joined before they got some funding, you're really more of a co-founder than an employee, by the way. And you do that, and you're still doing it with the hopes that they succeed and they become really big and that you make it big, and if not, then you fail and you didn't make the salary you could have made at a bigger company. Then you go up the hierarchy. You could work at a bigger company, make a reliable salary, have a good life, be awesome, go hang gliding and skiing in Tahoe and like have unlimited vacation, and Google, will bring you food whenever you want it and do your laundry and all that great stuff. And then one step beyond that in terms of lifestyle, I found, is people who've been able to create lifestyle businesses. So the lifestyle of startup founders tends to be like, The lifestyle of lifestyle business founders actually tends to be comfortable, because they found a way to create value, to create a product people want. They haven't tried to take any crazy bets in growing it super fast. They're doing it reliably, but on average, they tend to be able to pull in a decent amount of money. And they can actually be making more money than people who are working at a steady job, be working for themselves, get all these things people talk about when they think of founders, but they're not doing it the Silicon Valley way where they're going big or going broke. The one caveat to this is if you're young, it's like the best time to try to go big or go broke, because the worst case scenario is you tried for 2 years, you failed, and then you're on the same page as all of your peers, which is like broke and looking for a job. So there are no rules, but this is kind of our general philosophy. It's like we see so many people, they only make it 2 months in. I'm going to start a startup. I'm like, okay, cool. How's that going for you? 2 months in, like, well, my significant other dumped me, and my parents don't talk to me, and I have no money, and are you hiring? Is not an uncommon a sort of conversation to have. So the resources that you can look at if you want to find out more about the life of founding a Silicon Valley style startup: Paul Graham's essays. Paul Graham is the original founder of Y Combinator, the investment firm in Mountain View. Sam Altman, the new president of Y Combinator, ran a class at Stanford called, I think, How to Start a Startup. And all the lectures and all the information for that class is available online. Stanford made it available for free. And then Ben Horowitz, who runs the venture capital firm with Mark Andreessen, the gentleman who gave the quote earlier about euphoria and terror. Ben Horowitz wrote a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, where he tells a bunch of crazy war stories about his time managing companies and all the mistakes he made and all the times that things were terrible, and how you can learn from that. So if you want to read about these, I think they're super interesting and really, really high quality resources and worth exploring, even if you're not sure that you want to do it someday. And what I hope my talk has done above all else, because I have high confidence that there are founders of future billion-dollar companies in this room, and I don't just say that to like be nice, I hope that I've encouraged you to take a more rational path. One that sets you up for success by forcing you to really check whether now is the time to launch yourself headfirst into your startup, and to encourage you to explore things like working first at a small startup, things like starting a lifestyle business to practice management and growth, and then really save your energy and your potential for the moment in your life when that idea or that opportunity comes along where you can't say no, it's worth going big or going broke. And on average, can anyone guess when that opportunity hits people who want to go through Y Combinator? It's like an early stage startup investor, so it's a pretty good metric for at what point in people's lives people will get hit with this this inspiration to start a company that they really have to do full time. How old do you think the average is? Can I hear some? Mid-30s? 35? 40? Wow, you're like a very educated crowd. I think it's on the order of like 29, 30, which means like y'all got time, most of you, right? If it hasn't hit you yet, maybe a decade before it hits you, you're not even behind. Like, if you think that your destiny is to start a startup and that you'd be upset at yourself if you die without starting one, then you're only really behind if you're like 40 and haven't tried. And you have that much time to really discover the moment where it makes sense. And once you do it once, you'll learn a lot that will help you do it again the next time better, and so on and so forth. But I want to caution you that it's not a lot of what people assume it's like, and a lot of folks are doing it for the wrong reasons. So that's the crux of the talk. You can, I guess, close my laptop, and I wanted to ask if any of you have any questions. Yes? What happens to the ideas of companies that fail? Typically, they go poof. The website shuts down, the app gets pulled from the app store, the service is canceled, and maybe someone goes and does it again, but it'd be a different group of people. Sometimes companies are bought by other companies, but the idea is still shut down. And that happens when the company, let's say Google, thinks that your team is really great and they would love to have your team at Google working on Google products. So they buy your company to get your team, and then they shut down your service. That happens all the time. It's called an acqui-hire. They're acquiring you, but they're really hiring you. There's tons of ideas that have been done more than once. If you think about like a service like Instacart, which is a mobile application and a website that lets you order groceries, almost the same idea in some form happened in the dot-com bubble like a decade ago or more than a decade ago. It was called Webvan. And it was a bad idea then because there were only like 50 million people online in the whole world, and now there's like billions. So the total market size was not there, and the logistics were complicated, and the technology was not quite up to date or yet where it needed to be. But it was an idea. They did it. They raised tons of money. They failed. And then a decade passed, someone else came up with the same idea, did it, this time it was the right time, and then it exists again with different management, different implementation, different execution. Yes? What's the biggest thing that I've learned in my startup journey? Probably the danger of false patterns. So, do you know what a cargo cult is? During World War II, the United States set up military bases on sparsely inhabited islands. I think they were Polynesian islands. They created landing strips for their planes as a place to refuel before going to war. I'm pretty sure it was for the Eastern Front in Japan and thereabouts. So there were islanders who had never seen modern civilization, all of a sudden had Americans building military bases and landing planes on their island. And they thought that the planes were sort of mythical, like eagles that brought food, because the Americans, when they had all this cargo come in with the planes, would unload the cargo and then give some of it to the islanders to be nice. And so they would donate clothes and food, and the islanders came to form an association between the landing strips, the planes, and food and clothes. And they formed what are called cargo cults, where they have a religion that is formed that to this day still exists on these islands, where they build landing strips hoping that one day a plane will appear with more food and clothes. In their minds, the landing strip is what made the plane come, and that was the pattern they observed, and so they're trying to replicate it. So out of they cut down trees, and out of palm leaves and all that, they'll arrange what kind of looks like a landing strip, and then they'll pray and make incantations to Sergeant Bob and names of people that they met in the 40s that they remember gave them food, and they view as kind of mythical deities that they're trying to get to come back. The reason I bring this up is that a lot of people in the Valley have been behaving trying to mimic what they see as the external signals of what startups look like without doing any of the things behind the scenes that actually make startups work. So it's not enough to put on all the airs or all the impressions. You can't just call for Sergeant Bob and build a landing strip and expect that a plane is going to appear out of the sky. In the same way, you can't make a business card that says entrepreneur on it and become an entrepreneur, as I have seen some people try to do at parties. You can't, be constantly grabbing coffee with important people and thinking that you're actually making progress towards building a company, because you see that other successful entrepreneurs seem to network a lot with other successful people, so you forget that the reason that they're doing that is because they're successful in the first place. You mistake the signal for the reality, and you go and you try to network with people instead of actually building something valuable. There's 101 examples I could give, but false pattern sort of following has been one of the most dangerous things I've come across, because people are almost starting to view the Silicon Valley mentality and the writings of Paul Graham and Sam Altman kind of like a religion. There's people who come here and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm in the mecca of tech and I'm going to be an entrepreneur and do a startup. And they only seen it from the outside. They've seen it in movies. They've seen the HBO show. They've read articles online. And so when they get here, they try to do all the things that they see startups do from the outside without doing any of the real stuff, from the inside. I mean, there was literally a fad where, word got out that one of the successful companies in the Valley has Nerf guns and quadcopters. So little remote controlled helicopters you can pilot around the office, and Nerf guns so they could the employees could have Nerf gun battles. And the word got around, and for a period of time, for 2 years, every startup that started, one of the first things they would buy is Nerf guns and quadcopters, because they were yeah, that's how we create a good office culture, right? And they just completely missed the point. It was the group of people that were at that company who had a shared interest, and the company enabled their shared interest, and so they all bought Nerf guns because they wanted to do Nerf wars. But if you just assemble a random group of new employees and then be hey, have Nerf guns, you have culture now. Aren't you having fun working here? That doesn't work. But for 2 years, everyone was trying to mimic what they saw. And there's again, so many different examples. So that's the main thing I learned, is watch out for false patterns. And when people give you advice, you need to be able to trace the dots all the way to how that advice applies to you and whether it actually applies to you, and if it does, how it can help you. And if you can't trace all the dots and you're blindly following someone's advice, you end up doing these cargo culty things where you try to emulate what you see others doing or simply blindly follow advice without fully understanding how it can help you. Yes? How important is the team in the early stages of the startup? How do you find co-founders? How do you know if they're the right people? It's the most important thing because it's the number one thing that kills companies is co-founders getting into arguments and deciding to quit. How do you find co-founders? Well, look around. My co-founder and I met in computer science class in high school. We had no idea back then we'd start a company together someday. There are people in this room who will start companies together in the future who don't know it yet. And he and I didn't really hang out that much in high school. Like we knew each other and we had a lot of mutual friends, but we were kind of peripherally aware. And you'd be surprised 5 years from now who in this room is going to be your partner in a business. But keeping in touch with like-minded people and surrounding yourself with the right kind of people is super important. If the 5 people you are closest to, like go to the gym, eat healthy, ship code, and are super into like making an impact in the world, then you're probably going to end up going to the gym, eating healthy, shipping code, and trying to make an impact on the world. If the 5 people closest to you are spending their life energy climbing the rankings at League of Legends, then you're probably going to try and climb the rankings at League of Legends. And I know plenty of successful people that also play League of Legends. That's not necessarily the point I'm making, but that the primary priorities and activities of those around you end up heavily influencing you and ultimately the people you get connected to and then ultimately who you might start with as a partner. In terms of how are they the right person? Smart, hardworking, personality compatible. You know, would you move in with them? Would you trust them with your life? Would you be totally confident in them covering for you if you were not available? That sort of thing. So sometimes you have to take a leap of faith, and you don't know these things up front, but you still try with someone. You see how it evolves. But those are kind of some of the signals you want to look for. Another big one is probably stability. Someone who can like ground you and who's like not constantly changing their mind or like. Someone who's like stable is quite important. All right, we'll do the 3 more in the back. Let's start with in front of Andrew. Sorry, the lights, I can't see who you are. Some real life examples of lifestyle businesses. Most recent one, it was interesting. Plenty of Fish was a dating website that sold for like $500 million, but it was actually built as a lifestyle business. The founder did it because he thought it was a better way for dating websites to exist and then spent about 10 hours a week working on it. The thing is that by definition, most lifestyle businesses you might not be aware of because they're not trying to grow, so they probably haven't like reached all of you, right? They're not big like Facebook. But think of like someone who does app consulting for others could be a lifestyle business. Someone who sets up IT for buildings like this one on contract. That's a lifestyle business. Someone who builds a product that has a dedicated base of subscribers. Oftentimes, those are lifestyle businesses. Like, I wonder if Sketch is probably a lifestyle business. I'm not sure, but it's the kind of product like that. If they specifically are not, like there's other companies out there that are making like utility apps, things like that on the App Store. Often those are lifestyle businesses. Many game studios, lifestyle businesses, like 1 or 2 developers, 2 or 3 developers working on a passion project. Anything that is where the goal is to sustain the lifestyle of those creating it, and not try to grow too much beyond that. I'll think of some better examples. Andrew? Okay, and then is that Michael? Sorry, I can't. So how do you balance like keeping the majority share in your company versus like selling it to investors? How do you balance, having authority in the company when someone else now owns the majority, right? So very good questions. That's actually an interesting point about VCs. Another thing why not to start a startup. Venture capitalists, when they invest in your company, can eventually fire you. They appoint a board of directors. So I am a boss at Make School and my co-founder, but I actually, if we accept more funding later, will have a boss whose only job is not to run the company so much as this check in on whether I'm doing a good job, and that person could fire me, and that person will probably be someone that is close to my investors, and they could band together with that person to try to fire me if they wanted to in a potential foreseeable future. It is a thing that happens. Investors are not necessarily the ones who know the best about your company, and when they get a controlling stake in your company, they occasionally force you to make bad decisions. And so the mentality that I have is 100% of $0 is worse than 1% of $1 billion. And so being stingy on raising funding by selling parts of your company to investors to the point where your company might not exist at all because you don't get the funding you need to survive is not productive. And a lot of founders who are very kind of penny wise and pound foolish will run their companies into the ground because they don't want to sell too much of their company to an investor, so they turn down a deal. Next thing they know, they can't raise money. Next thing they know, they're out of business. Now they own nothing. Which brings me to the second part of your question. What do you do when investors want you to change direction and they have a controlling stake in the company? And the answer is to, if you have the luxury to, I mean, if it's between survival and death, nothing you can do. If you have the luxury to, interview your investors like you would interview an employee or a co-founder, or like you're on a date with them. Are your values aligned? Right? You know, when, like, at some point in a relationship, when you're like together for a long time, like you should probably be on the same page about whether you want to have children or not. And if you are on the same page, then all is well. And if you're not, you're in for a bad time. No matter who has authority in the relationship, it's just an incompatibility that's going to fester and be a problem. And with investors, you need to think of similar things like, what do they want to see? And can I make good on that? And am I okay with the fact that I've committed to investment from this investor and that they want me to do X, Y, Z, and that if I don't accomplish it, they might force me to do it their way that I don't want? Am I okay with that? But knowing that up front is what's most important. A lot of founders, I think, neglect to interview their investors as if their investors were going to join the team. And so they think, oh, well, they're giving me money, you know, so I shouldn't be too hard on them. But if you have the luxury of choice, you should be very careful in picking your investors. And that's why it's sometimes worth accepting worse terms, meaning one investor says, I'll give you $1 million for 10% of your company. Another investor says, I'll give you $1 million for 15% of your company. And you're like, oh, that's a worse deal. But if they're aligned with you, then so much more worth it to go with them than with a person who's giving you a better deal, but actually philosophically does not see the company going the same direction as you. So I'll give you a couple concrete examples. When I talk to investors are always like, Jeremy, so you should probably like consider shutting down the summer academy and just doing online classes because online is the future. I'm like, and this was our last meeting. That's a philosophical difference that I don't want to have to deal with later down the line. Like, one day, would it be great if Make School could offer comprehensive online courses, make a lot of money that way, reach a lot of people? Like, of course it'd be awesome. But today and now, I am really good at offering in-person courses, both in the Summer Academy and the 2-year program. I am not going to bring on an investor who is itching to have me change my business from this into, like, Udacity or Coursera or iTunes U or something like that, right? And this happens, like, quite a bit. I also get investors who go, tuition deferred model. Yeah, that's cute. Oh, it's nice how ideological you are. You should really charge up front for your 2-year program. Like, when would you? Oh, great that you're doing tuition deferred for now, so that you can get some students interested in the early days. But like, when are you going to switch to charging them up front? Like, when are you going to get approved to give student loans so that they can take on debt to go to Make School and you can get the money up front, and then they have to pay it later, and the government holds the loan, and it's not none of your business. When is that going to happen? That'd be really great, when you can start, taking people's money up front, and then they'll be in debt, but it's fine because they'll make big salaries later. So it's totally, Jeremy, like, don't sweat it. Like, you're going to do fine. They're going to turn out great. They're not going to be really, really in debt. But like, when is that happening? When are you charging up front? I'm like, ooh, that's not right. If I had an investor like that was on my board that had control over my company, well, we would butt heads at some point, and it would be bad. So knowing that up front is very, very important.